Hello and welcome to the very first DAL Global Virtual Lounge, the show where we discuss the future of the modern workplace and the impact of diversity, inclusion and belonging with the world's most successful and innovative business leaders. Today, I'm joined by three remarkable CEOs, all from very different global industries. We have Ben Page, the CEO of Ipsos Mori, Leann Hearne, the CEO for First Art Group, and John Dutton, the CEO for the Rugby League World Cup. Now, we're asking a very big question today, which has many different facets to it and is particularly poignant given the global pandemic that we are in at the moment. But that is, how can we lead in uncertain times? And also, how is this applicable not only beyond the global pandemic, but also how important is inclusion and indeed diversity and belonging during times of crisis? I know it's a pretty big question, and I have to say to all of our listeners as well today, it's not been easy getting three very big CEOs into this virtual room together. So I'm very pleased about that. And Ben, because I like picking on you, I'm going to come to you first, if that's okay. Obviously,
Sure.
You have a big oversight when it comes to global market trends and such. But whilst we are kind of in the thick of things when it comes to this pandemic, I wonder, what are some of the key pieces that you are seeing from an overview?
Well, obviously, at the moment, people are actually more worried about the impact on their jobs and the economy than they are on their health. Although when we asked people globally what they were most concerned about, it was actually the weak and the vulnerable, which I thought was positive, particularly in Britain. So, you know, people are very anxious, understandably, but they are generally supportive of the measures their governments take. All over the world, we've seen, which we always see in times of crisis, rising support for governments, because I think, and this is a central point that we'll probably all come back to, at times of crisis, people turn to leaders. And that's certainly been true in my own organisation. I'm sure it's been true in my colleagues' organisations on this webinar.
Absolutely. And Leann and John, what are you both seeing? Because of course, we're all from very different industries here, which I think will be particularly interesting in terms of comparables and those who are obviously listening in, who could be working both within public and private sectors, and of course then across to you, John, within the entertainment sector, which actually is very, very key at the moment, because people are homebound and missing out on a lot of their usual entertainment and some of the things perhaps that relieve them of stress on a day-to-day basis.
I think people are understandably anxious. The world operates, particularly financial markets, around certainty, and there is no certainty at the moment. I think it's really interesting how people have adapted really quickly. Some really interesting things I've been reading over the last few days about people going more to social media, about wanting to interact. One of our strap lines is about the power of together, and obviously we're having to find different ways of connecting, keeping our businesses moving, and showing leadership. So I think leadership very much is about being a role model, trying to be calm, think rationally, and also think positively. People will want and need things to look for whenever there is some normality from the situation. So all of those many things.
So, Leila, our sector is very much based in social housing. So we've got a couple of facets that we've been affected by the sector, by the crisis. One of which is clearly people. People's the first and foremost. So we operate in very poor neighbourhoods. So we've got some fantastic staff who are doing great things and have pulled together, much as the two guys have already said. We're seeing some great morale boosting options from staff. But we've also got some real issues in communities that are coming to the forefront. So vulnerable and poor people are the ones that are suffering quite a lot, and we're seeing that. So the expectations of organisations like mine are actually stronger now than at any other time, at a point when we've got fewer people to support us because we've got people isolated equally. And the other facet to us is our business is affected by the construction and compliance sector. So we have properties where we have to do compliance legislation, gas and safety checks, the type of stuff that most people have seen in a world that's post-Grenfell, and also construction sector where we're building new homes. And there's some real fear in both of those sectors about how we're going to remain compliant and keep people safe, but equally the impact on our ability as a business to serve people that need homes, when the construction sector and the housing sector will clearly be impacted quite quickly from the economic impact of the overall situation.
Thanks for sharing, Leann, and some very, very different observations there. But one thing which I've noticed has been a common thread, not only here, but also with other leaders that I've been interviewing over the last couple of weeks, is that sense of togetherness, but also the amount of pressure on leaders, CEOs and their boards that they are under, not only to stay calm and collected and be that voice of reason and rationale to be able to put arms around others, but also to work out what best to do in times that, frankly, a lot of us don't have any idea about, what may or may not be coming. And I wondered, first of all, to all of you, what was your initial, what were the initial, kind of feelings that you had individually when you heard this breaking news, and with which then to start to communicate to your organisations? So how did you feel personally? And secondly, what advice might we be able to give to other leaders across the board who are trying to put brave faces on right now, but don't necessarily know all of the answers to their specific sectors, and what to say to their people?
We're obviously very different businesses, but I think all of us have probably lived through the downturn of 2008, or indeed, in the case of public sector organisations, the cuts after 2010. So I think if you've lived through that before, then the first issue of a crisis, or a financial crisis, and this is both a human and a financial crisis, is not to be optimistic. I think if you assume everything's going to be fine and it will just breeze over in a few months, you're probably going to find yourself having to do difficult things. I think personally, and I think it varies, but I think transparency and honesty about what about the position, that's important. Particularly, we've had to take pay cuts, we've had to furlough lots of people, and that's been important. Explaining the situation to people, explaining that we've been here before. I think many of us have got colleagues who will have been with us for a very long time. And it helps me that I've been in the organisation for 32 years, because I can talk about the 1990s or the 1980s and put it in context. But I think that sort of transparency, not basically being fairly honest, and even if it's uncomfortable, I think people want the uncomfortable truth. Really, you can sort of soft soap people, but they'd rather know the truth. But at the same time, you have to tell the truth, but be empathetic about the implications. Because of course they're enormous, and many people are worried about. 7 out of 10 people in Britain now feel their jobs are at risk, and that's a huge number of people. Actually, it's many more than will actually lose their jobs. It's not going to be quite that dramatic, I suspect, even in the worst case scenario. But nevertheless, that just shows the level of anxiety that you need to cope with. So you must acknowledge people's fears, be absolutely blunt, and I think, but also open and empathetic.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and just to add to that, Leila, for us, it's about being solution focused. It's about adapting to the current environment. We talk a lot about controlling the controllables. There are lots of things going on around us that we cannot simply control. I think being and building resilience, particularly within a team that are anxious, and I think a lot of that comes down to good communication and authentic leadership. And back to what I said earlier, really about being positive. Ben said, we have to be honest. We have to. We can't hide behind what a crisis this is, but there has to be some elements of positivity so that people can, in a time of uncertainty, start to look forward and remember some of the things that make our nation great, and some of the stories about how people are coping, how people are shopping for neighbours and looking after people. I just think that's actually something to really celebrate.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we've celebrated all the people who volunteered for the NHS, and I think you absolutely. There's a great quote from Napoleon that a leader is a dealer in hope, and that of course is the other side of it. So tell people the truth, but also show them that there is a path out of it, what we're going to do about it together, how we're going to adapt as an organisation, the new things that we will do. In our case, we have 2,000 interviewers who collect data, who obviously can't at the moment. So how some of them are going to work on the telephone instead, how we're moving data collection from offline to online. creating virtual environments to communicate with clients in. So you've got a positive story about how the organisation can change and the positive things that are happening. So absolutely, I mean, when I say be blunt, I don't mean just say, yeah, you're all going to die. But I do mean, let's be honest, some people, I mean, people are already losing their parents in my company. And I'm losing we've already lost our first member of staff yesterday. But at the same time, you know, most of us will survive. And so it's that sort of balance of hope, but also realism.
Mm-hmm. And how strategic can we be as well when it comes to terms like furloughing, which I know is an American term that was perhaps not so widely used in the UK. I actually didn't know what it meant a couple of months ago. But I've seen a number of organisations start to offer this up to those within the organisation who have got you know, critical care when it comes to elderly parents, or whether it is their mothers, fathers, have others within the wider family to be able to look after, so that they have the opportunity first. And there's actually been some quite positive repercussions. So where Ben, you talk about being honest, and John and Leann, you also do, you know, we can't put a plaster over this and pretend completely that everything is okay, but we can try and make the best of a bad situation and start to maybe strategically prioritize. I wonder, how have you, because of course we've got a lot of similar problems, but we've got a lot of very different sectors and each will adapt in different ways, but how have you taken this and now realign kind of the strategy in terms of priorities around people and around the ways of working?
So Leila, I'll go with that one. So as an organisation, we're in a highly regulated sector, and we have to plan our business plans for 30 years. And we have to stress test those business plans regularly, and they're reviewed by the regulator. So in all honesty, we've been planning business modelling, we've been planning for Armageddon, and we've been doing that since December. So since the announcement that came out of China, we started to stress test, risk manage and business plan from then. And we've got a business model that plans for Armageddon. Where we're looking at our people though, we're having to manage people as if it's just a little bit of a blip, in response very similar to the conversations from the two guys, which is that people are dealing with these issues quite differently, and it's important for us to make sure that we're supporting people through it and that we don't have to share all of the massive risks that Armageddon would potentially show, but actually share some of the real risks that we're actually facing. So there's two very different business models that we've got running alongside one another. And how we've managed with the people side, I mean, I think we're quite lucky as an organisation because we're cash rich. But what we do have is pressures around our banking covenants, because we borrow heavily in order to build. So we have different pressures than many other businesses, and certainly we're not under some of the same pressures that private sector businesses are. But we have funded the cover for our staff. So we very, very quickly early on funded people who had to either shield or self-isolate. We also funded people who had to look after children, and we did that on full pay. But we have subsequently now started to prepare for a furloughing process that will probably come into fruition in the next week or so. Now, we're not furloughing all of our employees. We've got about 500, so we'll probably furlough about 120, and those are primarily those front-facing services where we physically can't go onto construction sites, into homes, and so on. But we've had to manage that very carefully, and at the same time, keep positive and keep communicating. One of the conversations that you had earlier on around how we keep people motivated is, if you think you've done enough communication, do it again and 7 times more, because you haven't. And you'll need to prepare those communications for everyone's different needs. And my experience is that people you think are going to manage this really well are the ones who suddenly have a real issue and start to have mental health pressures. The people that you think might wobble are the ones that suddenly come out and can deal with a crisis. And we've just got to almost work with all of those variables.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and Ben said earlier, it just puts it into sharp perspective. People are losing their lives. You know, this is a global crisis, the likes of which we've never experienced in our lifetime before. And that in all of our decision making, I think it's important to keep perspective and keep context. We made a decision we want to play our part, so we're in a much more fortunate position. We haven't gone to furlough. We've started to look at our business model in terms of cash flow and how we're going to manage through this. But that's just good housekeeping. In playing our part, we wanted to stick our hand up and thank the NHS staff and the frontline workers, the key workers, and have made a gesture of thanks to do them, because there are some quite exceptional stories out there, and it goes back to the context of people losing lives, but people looking after each other, and that's just so powerful.
Some really good points there, and I think positive storytelling and storytelling in general is so incredibly powerful, especially at times like this, and across the board in social media and on the news, even though we're advised not to watch it too regularly because clearly that can be bad for our mental health as well. But the positive pieces are, examples like those clapping for the NHS outside their homes, which brought a tear to my eye, and businesses who are ploughing huge amounts of money into supporting people and those outside of their immediate business vicinities. I wondered, what are your three organisations doing when it comes to not only sharing the positive stories, but also to giving back? Because I think those pieces are absolutely critical and are the mark, frankly, of very good businesses trying to do good, not only in business, but for wider society. And those will be ones that will come out the other end of this, who will be championed for what they've done for others.
So we are having to lay off lots. We are furloughing lots of people, but we've also, I think the point is about trusting people. So we've just said, if you need to take time off to look after your kids, just take it on full pay. If you need to look after your parents, just take it on full pay. Just telling people to work flexibly. We've had I've taken a 20% pay cut. The management team and actually the top 5% have all volunteered for a 10% pay cut. We're doing a consultation with the staff about pay cuts, but we're also working pro bono for the National Health Service. So some of the things that we can do, obviously government is a big client of ours, but we're working pro bono, building a community where NHS staff can share notes privately, so it won't be accessed by the media, but they can talk to each other around the country about the issues they're facing, and sharing some of that in a slightly less official way than the NHS. We're doing it for NHS England, but it won't be, people will hopefully be able to talk confidentially given some of the pressures inside the service. But yeah, people, I think we have to trust people actually, and people want to do the right thing, and we should celebrate our colleagues who are giving up time to volunteer, etc., and make that possible. But it's if we're asking a lot, then we need to give people freedom at the same time. Absolutely.
Because of the nature of our business, we're obviously on the front line of where some of those communities have got real challenges. So we've done a couple of things. One of which is we've redeployed a lot of our frontline workers who would normally go into people's homes and can't do, into a community hub that's been working with the local authority and a couple of other smaller charities, where we're deploying staff to go and do a lot of those services, like doing shopping for people, keeping people advised, there's a telephone hub for people to ring in and ask questions. We're sending people out to talk to them, or doing it remotely. So we've redeployed those. We've also got a number of our repair guys that we've used as a care and repair service for older and vulnerable people who can't go out of their homes but need somebody to come and do certain jobs or take them to and from the NHS. Or indeed, one of the things we've been doing is getting people's homes ready for early discharge from hospital so that beds can be freed up for the NHS for the crisis itself. And the other bit is we've been volunteering people and funding food banks in the local area. Again, because it is an area that's very got some real issues around poverty, which has been super. And another business stream that we have is we do social investment for social enterprise businesses. And obviously we've got about 120 of those that are all suffering fairly quickly as a result. So we've been working with them to give short-term business loans, put them in touch to signpost them to areas where they can get business advice, and we've had people advising them as well, so we can keep their businesses alive for them as long as we possibly can. So a whole range of stuff in the community, and it just never ceases to amaze me how people will suddenly come out and do great things for people without any credit expected, and it's been super to see, it really has.
That's so wonderful, Leann.
Yeah, Couldn't agree more. Local heroes have become superheroes, and certainly from our perspective, we want to celebrate. I think Ben mentioned storytelling. I think storytelling is really important. So, from a practical perspective, very similar flexible working arrangements for people that have children, looking after families. We also encourage people to volunteer in the local community. We've got just over 5,000 volunteers that signed up to come and work on the tournament, and we've reached out to those and signposted those to local volunteering opportunities. We've also got, you mentioned Leila before about mental fitness, a big mental fitness program that we're looking to try and accelerate the delivery of that and create some online opportunities. And as I mentioned earlier, we have made available the first 20,021 tickets to the tournament will be to reward and thank NHS staff and key workers. It's a small thing in the grand scheme of things, but we think that by the time our tournament comes around in October and November next year, it's just a really great way of thanking people, and also once again celebrating the wonderful things that they've done for us.
There's some brilliant initiatives then. We had a couple of questions actually from some of our members about those 2021 tickets that we'll get to very shortly. And I mean, thank you very much, all of you, for sharing those pieces and some of the good news stories as well, which I think is one of the silver linings to the cloud that we are living in right now. And since we're talking so much about people here, and of course, one of the key things that the DIAL stands for is diverse, inclusive, aspirational leaders. I wondered, how relevant do you think inclusion is at times like this, and what has happened with the diversity, inclusion and belonging practices, which I know you're all equally passionate about in your own different ways? How are those different facets, which are still important, having an effect in your business right now?
Well, I'll go first on this one. I think I was reflecting on this morning. I think leaders build up a stock with their colleagues during good times, some of which they then spend during difficult times. But clearly, we've already heard the point about communicating, and even when you think you've communicated, you've got to do some more. So I've gone from monthly to weekly webinars, and I think the other thing is using some of the tools that are available to bring people together and to make sure that nobody's left behind. And that becomes all the more important because most people are now isolated at home. So making sure that all of your staff have a daily check-in on WhatsApp with their line manager, and those groups exist. Making sure there are coffee mornings. We have yoga and meditation. We've got 4 or 5 different people, because we're 2,000 people, teaching yoga online, so you can book in and do yoga together. And actually, we've discovered, in the same way that we're seeing each other's houses in a way that we've actually, there is some evidence that it's actually bringing people closer together as teams. I'm not sure. I think it's just all the things you would normally be doing about diversity. It's just checking in on people who are particularly going to have difficulties. But and it's more communication, more empathy, because of the stress that people are under.
Yeah, all of the above, Leila. Very much on team meetings is to make sure that everyone feels engaged and included, and using different tactics to do that. We've introduced some mindfulness sessions, but just we sort of conclusion for us, we've turned into unity and togetherness, and I think that's been quite powerful in bringing the team together. We have a number of people who are employed directly by us, but quite a big team of what we call super consultants, and they've always been regarded as part of our team, so now more than ever, and certainly some of their work has dried up in other areas, is we just want to reach out to them, we want to look after them, and the same with our suppliers, our agencies, the sort of wider family, and that unity together has been quite powerful.
And for me, Leila, I think, yeah, like Ben, I've also been considering what that means. And I think you just go back to first principles and you just do what's right. And the first thing you think about is just people are people, and I don't or haven't thought about the issues that they may or may not have, or specific bits about diversity and inclusion. What I've just thought is I've got a bunch of people who are relying on me, and we're relying on each other, and you just have to do the right thing and do it quickly. Very similar to the guys, I've had various virtual coffee mornings and regular meetings, and one of the things that I'm doing after this session is a new starters coffee morning. So that's going to be an interesting one, because we've got people who have started with us as new employees this last couple of weeks. So it must be really scary for them because they haven't even been to the office. They're just having to try and work through a laptop. So I'm having virtual coffee mornings with them. And the other bit is I'm one of those people that's in the 12-week group that has to be shielding because I've got a lung condition. And that's been particularly frustrating on a personal level because I'm not a girl that sits still by any stretch of the imagination. But what I've done is use it as an opportunity to share much more regularly vlogs and blogs twice a week at the moment with staff about what it means for me and how it's impacted me and my family. And that actually, I've probably had more hits and more comments on some of those small blogs and vlogs from staff about that than I ever have before, because I've had no alternative but to be dead transparent, dead honest, and show them how I'm really feeling. And that's gone down well. So whoever it was, I think it was Ben that said right at the beginning, you just need to be transparent. I think be transparent, be authentic, and be exactly as you are, and don't apologise for it. And people really appreciate that.
I absolutely love that. And I think that's one of the really touching things that have come out of this crisis, is that I've heard a lot of feedback from C-suite and leaders who have shared with me that they're now getting a window into the lives of their colleagues that they perhaps wouldn't have had otherwise. There was a CEO that I spoke to the other day who told me he had his daughter on his lap when he was giving the weekly roundup session. And those that have got dogs, pets, cats, kids, what have you, who are kind of roaming around in the background, that's almost becoming the new norm, which is, I think it's really quite lovely. And whilst it's almost unusual to see this blurred line between personal life and business, perhaps that is what will happen in the future. And I wondered to all of you, and I'm sure, Ben, you've spoken to lots of leaders and compared what things are happening, I guess with them specifically, but do we think, as a broad brush overview, that the world will return to how it once was, or do we think it is going to be a blurred line between where we are right now, that flexible modern working, etc., and what it was previously? Now, I know it will vary industry to industry, but what are our thoughts surrounding the hopefully near future?
Okay, well, I think the first thing is we obviously some of our business is about trying to do predictions. So the main thing we know about predictions, of course, is that most of them are wrong. So yes, of course, you've got an acceleration of online, the use of online conferencing, online shopping, etc. So do offices become less important because half the people who are now isolated at home, sent home, actually decide they quite like it at home, they've skipped the commute, and offices become much smaller, more flexible hubs where people have meetings maybe only once or twice a week. To be honest, I don't think we know, and obviously it varies by sector. It also, I think, depends how long we're in lockdown. One of the things that we're looking at is a global values study that we do, and we've done it every year since 2013. But I actually found some of the data in it and looked at the trends back to 1999. So in Britain in 1999, only 13% of people were online. The figure today is 93%. And yet in terms of people's feelings, like feeling overwhelmed by technology, there's absolutely no difference in the percentage who say they feel overwhelmed by technology. There's absolutely no difference who say in the proportion, which isn't necessarily that high, who say the main thing in life is to be successful at work. It's just nothing. Some things change much less than we might think. So I think, yes, of course, I think there is some real people will discover that they can run businesses and organizations without offices, or with very few offices. I think that's an interesting one. But whether it's going to lead to a more empathetic society longer term, I'm not sure. I do think, unfortunately, that the economic squeeze is going to be with us in different formats. It's not going to be a sort of V-shaped recovery. There's going to be a permanent, pretty much a long-term hit that we're all going to take from this, and that may have other implications over time. But at the moment, the average forecast, and of course economists are usually wrong, but their average forecast is that this is the hit to the economy is greater than World War II, and currently potentially greater than the 1930s.
That's a very scary thought indeed, and I've heard many people comparing this to to the World Wars, and indeed on the Queen's speech as well. And I was hoping that perhaps it wouldn't be quite as bad, but I guess we will see. And well, to you, John.
Yeah, I think the world will be different. If you look at it from a sport perspective, sport will be significantly impacted. But I also think that sport will play a massive part in the rebuilding process. I think huge bounce. We've seen lots of events, the Olympics, Paralympics, football, etc., all being pushed back, and next year could be a real celebration. And again, going back to what I said earlier about something to look forward to. But I think people will have less disposable income, will potentially make different decisions, particularly around entertainment. But it's also probably too early to say. We don't know when lockdown will end. We don't know when we will get back to some sense of normality, and everyone's really keen to start making some decisions. But it's too early to say. I think the world will look very different, but hopefully sport can play a really big part in whatever the new norm looks like.
I certainly hope so. I mean, there's been lots of really fascinating pieces there on sports where pretty much everyone, including F1, has gone online now, and the engagement figures have been absolutely huge. Absolutely huge, and especially with rugby. What I loved about, in fact, our podcast last time, we were talking about how rugby actually can really aid various different inclusive communities. Not only kind of disabled, but through now introducing it into women's rugby, which I think is marvelous. So hopefully that can translate somehow into online coverage.
Yeah, it would be fascinating. There's been a real spike in eSports. It'd be interesting to see whether that is carried through or whether this is just a moment in time. Live sport is a social experience, and we want to be together. We want to share that experience and share our memories with other people. So I think there is a huge desire for people to get back to that normality, and also the structure that it gives in people's lives. But sport at the moment is just not important. It's about people and families and everyone's health and well-being.
And to you, Leann.
I think, it's really difficult to take a global view of what you think will happen to the world when you've been stuck in your front room or the kitchen, as I am for so far 3 weeks. And I think all of us will be making decisions on bits of information that we've got, although Ben has probably got access to a lot more than we've got. And I think the point about being leaders of hope, I'm a girl that's got a half glass full definitely on every day of the week. So I really hope and believe that people's natures will make things happen positively. I'm not stupid. I know the economy is going to take a massive dive. It's not that many years since we paid off the debt from World War II. So my children and grandchildren are going to be paying off the debt for this for years to come. But what we've seen is that people have survived through those intervening years in various ways. What I've witnessed has been the acceleration of progress in some of the things that I would normally want to introduce into a business that either the business would not accept easily, or me being, a little bit older than some of our younger generations may also not accept it. What I've seen is agile working has been grabbed in a way that in my previous experiences has taken 18 months as a bare minimum to bring into a business. And we've done it in a really quick way. So I think that's one of the positives. The other positive is that I've seen people's behaviours around how they work with their colleagues and being a bit more understanding, and I hope that would continue. I think there's been recognitions of how communities are nowhere near as strong as people sometimes think, so people pulling together will continue to support that. And the other bit is, I think we've been seeing the downturn of the retail market for some years now. I suspect that will fundamentally shift in a much quicker pace than we thought. The same as when John mentioned travel, I think travel will also change as well, and people will think differently about where they go to and from work. On a personal level, I've actually been saved by the fact that the yoga company near to where I live has done yoga classes 3 times a day online. And I've never been able to attend the yoga classes because my working day is 100 miles from where I live. And invariably I'm out of the door at 6:30 in the morning and I don't get home till 8:30 at night. That's made me rethink how I would work normally. And I think the yoga company has already said they're going to continue to do their services online for people like me, which will fundamentally change how I'm able to fit in any form of sport into my life. And if that happens just on a really small scale, then the hope in me thinks that if they can do that at a greater scale, then sport will touch so many people's lives in a very different way. And that's my hope mantra for the day, I think.
Thanks ever so much. I love yoga. There's a brilliant app, if any of you tried it yet, called Down Dog, and they walk you through all of the different exercises for beginners. John, I can see that you're not saying anything. So if you haven't tried yoga yet, perhaps you could have a go, because it does literally walk you through everything. You can get it up on your TV, and yeah, it's fabulous. Anyhow, we've got quite a lot of questions, and I'm conscious of timing here because I know that you're all three very busy CEOs. Because we've had so many questions, what I've tried to do is amalgamate some of them, because otherwise we could be here all day. And frankly, I could keep talking to you, I'm sure, all day, but I know that you are all very busy. But first of all, I'll start with some individual questions, and I'm going to come to you, Ben, first, if that's okay. And again, this is a pretty big question, so I think maybe perhaps we pick some of the values that you'd identified specifically. But I know that you launched recently the Global Trends analysis, and a couple of our members had asked, in light of COVID-19 and potentially future pandemics, of which hopefully there won't be many, how do you think that will impact those 12 trends and the 36 values that you laid out and identified? How are they going to perhaps change?
Well, if you go to the Global Trends website, which is www.Ipsos Global Trends, we've actually started updating it for COVID-19. But the point is that the theory of change that's there, that there are macro forces that affect us all, the known knowns that gradually affect human society and then lead of course, to signals. And one signal is just what we're doing at the moment. This conference, the massive growth in the Zoom share price is a signal of a massive change, but it's driven by a tiny virus. Actually, we mentioned the coronavirus in the report that we launched in February. But I think the key point is to understand which values will change, but actually to use the framework in that particular report to think about the scenarios for the future for your organization, because as we will be showing, there are many values that actually don't change. A belief in the death penalty, belief in gay rights or not liking gay marriage, all those things, those are sort of deep values. They don't change even with things like COVID-19 very quickly. So, I think most of it actually, to be honest, holds, and we think it's a useful framework for thinking about the future.
Fascinating. And Ben, one question actually from me here. You'd said something which I found quite interesting, that in a populist age, at least in Western media, we're finding this rising support for globalization and improvements when it comes to local and public services globally. And off the back of that, more people there is almost parity between people who are worried about technology destroying our lives, but also people saying that we need more technology to help solve our challenges. Are you seeing that balance now start to rise because of what's happened?
Okay, very quickly, because I let everybody else get a word in, but basically on that, what you've got is the same data anxiety hasn't really changed since the 1990s. The media like to report it as changing, but actually it hasn't. And in terms of apathy, which means assuming that you're going to inevitably lose privacy, you don't know what the terms and conditions are of all of the websites you've signed up for. Basically, those things are gently rising. So actually, the virus is going to make more of us rely more on apps, video conferencing, remote services, etc. And I think you're seeing already a doubling in the proportion of people trying online banking, but not unsuccessfully, to get a slot for online shopping, for grocery shopping, etc. So actually, although there's anxiety about it, and the privacy debate will go on and on, again, the reality on this is that people are anxious, but they're still going to use the technology anyway, because frankly, we now can't work without it. And some people would have discovered that they actually quite like working this type of way.
Thank you, Ben. And John, I had quite a few questions for you actually, so I'll try and surmise them into a snippet for you. But in a breakthrough moment for rugby league, the men, women's and wheelchair games, as we discussed briefly before, will come together for the first time on the sport's biggest stage, which is very, very exciting. And one of our members asked, what has been the biggest challenge to create a truly inclusive business. And whilst you're thinking about that one, there've also been questions around how we ensure that sport reaches, touches all corners of society, etc., and what other businesses can basically learn from the free ticket giveaway, which clearly they're hankering after a couple of free tickets there.
First question, lots of practical and also financial barriers that we had to jump over, but this is about a mindset. This is right from the start, 5 years ago, being determined to run the 3 competitions in parallel, and a drive towards equality, that every athlete will be treated the same, the introduction of prize money for win and wheelchair athletes, the equalisation of participation fees. So that's mindset. Of course, there have been some practical things that we have to work around, player welfare, etc. But it's something that we wanted to do, and you have to do it in an authentic way, and that has helped us have a set of values that when, as an executive and as a board, we make decisions, that we go back to our values. So it's hard to be truly values led, but incredibly powerful when you're able to make decisions on that basis. With regard to the free tickets, it was just a way of us putting our hand up, recognising this situation, doing something about it. And we'd love to do more, but this is just a genuine way of doing that. And from making a true difference, we want to create a legacy that's built on social impact, on making a positive impact on people's lives, far beyond it being a game of rugby league or a tournament full of 61 games. And we've seen some great seeds of encouragement, our mental fitness work, dance and choir. We're running an international development programme, a commitment to heritage, basically everything that isn't rugby league, so that we can engage with people and leave a social impact, and hopefully find a methodology to measure that and pass that on in terms of a knowledge transfer to other people.
I think that is just fantastic. I'm so excited for next year. I really, really am. And finally, Leann, again, I had a number of questions actually, which were surrounding more technicalities and social businesses from other housing organisations. I thought we could maybe cover that in a couple of future panels we have. So I'm going to ask here, someone has said, first, our places a very big emphasis on being different when it comes to how social businesses can provide real and lasting economic change and have an impact on the lives of people in their local communities, as well as thinking and acting differently, etc. How can other businesses learn from the social values that First Arc hold? And not only other businesses that might exist within a similar sector, but also others which are out of the sector, which I think is particularly key. Because I remember you've even said to me personally, we are very far ahead when it comes to diversity and inclusion, and you were surprised at where some of the businesses within the private space have sat. And I think, you know, the more that we can have these cross-sector businesses learning, peer sharing knowledge, the better. So I wondered whether you could share some of your thoughts or tips and guidance around that.
That's a huge question. I think the starting point would be John's point, actually, is being a values-led organisation. We very much live and breathe our values. So when we set our values or set the values, we did that with the customers and with our staff. So we make sure we live and breathe them, and we have examples and case studies and stories that we bring to life regularly to demonstrate that. I think some of the thing that sets us apart as a housing provider, for want of a better phrase, to many other housing providers is exactly the social impact. So we're regulated about how much we can and can't do as a provider of effectively renting social houses or building homes. So there's a limit to what we can do, so we don't step in the social care space. But what we can do is work much more closely with communities. Now, one thing that perversely happens in my experience is that the more poorer a community is, the greater they are open to having innovation and working together to come out and find solutions. And that's where the social impact story comes. So working with communities and being really definitive about what the community needs, not what you as a business can offer, is the real point, the starting point. The second point is be realistic as a business about what you can offer, and it isn't always about money. It's quite often around volunteering programs, you know, having staff to go and paint the local cricket club or whatever else is really important to that community is hugely valuable to the community and is dead easy for businesses to give away. And the bit that we do that's slightly different is around how we fund social enterprises and social businesses. So we do calculate our social impact value using traditional methodology that comes out of many organisations, which Ben will probably be aware of. But the actual impact, the personal actual impact, is when you give advice, give support, give guidance to individuals and communities, and we have done that through some of the smaller businesses. So employability is a massive issue for us in our community. So by making sure that we can help people set up new businesses, as well as train individuals who may want to do something different, is a really simple way that businesses outside of my sector can help, because there'll be loads of people, you know, the rugby league and other sports isn't about the sport. They've equally got people in their businesses who are business people. That's what they have to run it like. And the same goes for Ben's business and any other that you may talk about. So financial advice, specialist advice, people guidance, all of the things that are just there to run a business, individuals in communities need, and other businesses can give that offer and advice to them.
I love that. I think it's wonderful, and I hope now, when just relating to your point there, where you say communities that perhaps are the poorest, or the ones that are having the most difficult time, are more open to innovation. Perhaps right now, because everyone is going through this difficult time, we can actually use it to be able to innovate. Not only because in some instances we're forced to, but others where we think, well, if not now, then when? Perhaps we should try, and perhaps we should give it a go. Many businesses have been born out of tragedy, so perhaps there will be some good things that come out of this. And I think, you know, you've certainly all given the, you know, whilst a very honest view, also given some of the gleaming golden nuggets of wisdom that we need to clutch onto, I think, especially at times like this. And so before I kind of summarise and thank you all, I wondered, was there anything that anyone wanted to share, or any kind of parting pieces of wisdom before we say goodbye for today?
There's one thing, Leila, that I just wanted to pass on, because one young lady in our business sent me this privately to say, if you feel really difficult stuck at home on your own, then this should help you. And it's one thing that really landed well with me, which was that Isaac Newton was grounded at home through the bubonic plague in 1665. And it was while he was grounded that he came up with all of his theories on gravity and optics and calculus. So innovation, great ideas often come out of crises. And I thought that was a fabulous way to end, that Isaac Newton can do it, then so can we.
Most definitely. We can all be little Isaacs. Ben, I think you were going to say something there.
I was just going to say, be human. And if you can create something, if you can write a great novel or be Isaac Newton at the same time, that's even better. But the evidence from China, interestingly, we've been talking to our Chinese colleagues, and their experience of it is that the time in lockdown goes much faster than you think. And all of the times that you're going to read those books, do the TV box set, or learn to play the ukulele, actually, in the end, you turn out not to get any of those things done. So it obviously will take some discipline. But no, my main thing is be yourself, but more so, which is the normal message to leaders. But be human, because that's what we have to deal with at the moment.
Thank you ever so much. John, any parting comments from yourself?
Yeah, very similar to Leann. Through adversity, we develop great resilience. I think having a positive mindset is more critical now than ever before.
Thank you all ever so much. And there's been some really fabulous learning points there from all of you. I've taken away a huge amount, and I know our listeners and our membership community will do. But, you know, some of the key points there, I think, you know, what is potentially exciting is actually the speed of change and adaptation. We've seen a lot of good things happen, a lot of sense of community, a lot of pieces which could be good for our future. Agile working from home, carbon emissions going down. This could be changing the face of the business world and the wider community for the better, quite possibly. But what's been really remarkable has been the sharing of kind of these social impact stories, and the stories as well from giving back. When I asked the question about what businesses and what you've all done as CEOs and seasoned leaders with your own organizations, you're all straight all over it, knew exactly what had been done. Volunteering, people volunteering to take pay cuts. I think, you know, what's really just wonderful is you can see from all of your different stories that good things have come out of this. And whilst we're being honest about the challenges which are there, you know, the very, very worst of it is, you know, people are dying, and actually business, you know, business can help support people in these times of crisis, and people at all different levels, all different organizations, you know, are quick to come to the rescue. And so finally, for leaders who are listening in and hopefully very inspired by today, be human, be yourself, be more so even yourself. And also, if you haven't communicated enough, keep communicating. If you think you've communicated too much, keep going, because you probably still haven't. So thank you all again very, very much indeed. All of the show notes at the end of today's show will be available on www.dialglobal.org. Thanks, Ben. See you later.
Bye.
Bye now. Bye, Leann. Bye, John.